Alright, in this unit we're going to be focusing on energy, looking at types of energy, sources, comparing alternative energies, our renewables versus non-renewables, and so forth. So let's go ahead and get started. We know that the energy is the ability to do work. Okay, we know that this is important and vital to maintain life processes. And we also know that most of the energy comes from outside the Earth. Okay, we know that the sun is that starting point of our energy source. We know the sun is going to give the Earth radiant and thermal energy. We also know that we cannot create or destroy energy. We know that we're just going to change its form. We're going to take in food, and we can manipulate that food. Food is a type of chemical energy. We can manipulate it and extract energy from it. We're going to give off energy. Most energy that is lost or given off is going to be given off as heat or friction. Alright, now our forms of energy. You should be familiar with these: mechanical, thermal, radiant, electrical, chemical, and nuclear. Now let's look at them a little bit more closely. Our mechanical energy is energy and movement. Okay, you have movement of energy, or things that are moving, and when they move, they are using energy, producing energy, and that is going to be our mechanical energy. We know that is going to involve kinetic and potential. Our thermal energy is going to be energy from heat, or heat energy. We know that this is going to be created or started through the movement of particles. So the faster particles of a substance move, the more energy is going to be given off. The slower the particles move, the less energy is going to be given off. Now we can measure the amount of heat energy, okay? Measure how fast these particles move or how slowly they move. And that measurement is going to be temperature. Taking the temperature of something is going to be measuring how fast or slow these particles move. Radiant energy is going to be energy carried by waves. And these are some examples of radiant energy. Light, so energy from the sun is going to be radiant. You have X-rays, UV rays, so forth. Our electrical energy is going to be movement of electrons. So we're kind of getting more to the scale of the atoms, down to the atom stage. So our movement of electrons, or transfer of electrons, is going to be our electrical energy. When these electrons move through objects, okay, that's going to create a current. And a very good conductor that we've talked about before would be copper. Copper is a very good conductor. Electrons can move very easily through copper matter, and that movement of electrons is going to allow for that current to occur. Alright, chemical energy. Chemical energy is energy stored between the bonds of molecules. Food is a good example of where chemical energy is going to be found. When we take food in, we break it down, we break the bonds, and we get energy from the food as a result. Usually it's the breaking of bonds. You can have bonds forming, but it's usually the breaking of bonds that's going to give us this energy. Nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is looking at the nucleus of an atom and the energy stored in the nucleus of an atom. If we can split the atom, the nucleus of an atom apart and release energy that way, that's going to be fission. If we can take two atoms or two nuclei of two different atoms and fuse them together, that is going to also release energy, and that's going to be fusion. Alright, so those were our types of energy. Now let's start looking at energy sources. We've got energy sources that are going to be considered non-renewable. We have energy sources that are going to be renewable. Now remember, if they're non-renewable, they can still replace themselves naturally. They can be formed in nature naturally, but it just takes a long time, longer than we allow them to make, because we usually are going to use them faster than they can remake themselves. That's why they're going to be considered non-renewable. Minerals are a good example of non-renewable resources. And then getting into the types of minerals is what we're going to be looking at in a minute. Some of the more specific non-renewables that we look at for energy. And then your renewables, obviously, there's such a large supply, they can remake themselves fast enough to where we won't run out of them by using them. So if we start with the non-renewable part, our fossil fuels for energy is our biggest non-renewables. So we can interchange the word non-renewable energy and fossil fuels because they kind of go together, they're one and the same. So our fossil fuels, we know that they were once living organisms. They once they've died, they've been pressurized, compacted, buried beneath rock and other things. They leave their carbon behind, and that carbon is what eventually turns into a fossil fuel. Coal, petroleum, and natural gas are our three major types of fossil fuels. Now, like I mentioned earlier, our minerals are going to be our non-renewables, and our biggest mineral that we look at, especially here in the U.S., is going to be coal. Coal is our biggest non-renewable, our biggest fossil fuel. It provides most of the electricity for the U.S. Okay, we know it's made from dead plant matter. We know that it's that leftover carbon and how it gets compacted, usually in stone and different types of rocks. And this is over millions of years process.